During a sold-out 1972 show at Madison Square Garden, Elvis spotted a teenage girl crying in the front row, her bracelet ripped away in the chaos of the crowd. Most stars would have kept singing. But what Elvis did next stopped the entire arena, and the moment that followed became one of his most legendary secrets. June 10, 1972, Madison Square Garden. The lights rose like a sunrise made of electricity, spilling gold and white over nearly 20,000 people. The whole arena buzzed like a giant living engine. Fans waved scarves, ticket stubs, even homemade signs that shook in their hands. You could almost feel the heat rising from the crowd, a warm pulse that matched the rhythm of the drums warming up behind the curtain. When Elvis stepped into the spotlight, the noise hit like a jet taking off. Some people screamed his name. Some cried immediately. Some just covered their mouth, frozen, because seeing him in person was nothing like seeing him on a TV set at home. He wore a white jumpsuit with a red-lined cape, and the rhinestones caught the lights like little explosions. The mic crackled as he leaned forward, smiling. The band settled into the opening chords of Proud Mary. Cameras flashed so fast they looked like stars popping open in the dark. But then something unusual happened, something Elvis wasn't expecting. As he looked over the first few rows, absorbing the energy like he always did, he saw a girl. 16, maybe 17. Long brown hair, a borrowed concert scarf around her neck. But her shoulders were shaking. Her eyes weren't shining with joy. They were red with panic. She was crying. Not happy tears. Real tears. Scared tears. Elvis's smile faded for a half second. He kept singing. The show couldn't just stop, but his eyes kept drifting back toward her. He saw the people around her trying to give her space, trying to comfort her, but the floor was too packed, too loud, too overwhelming. Why was she crying when everyone else was glowing? And then he saw it. Right near her feet, half hidden under a crushed paper cup, was something silver, thin, broken, barely reflecting the stage lights. A bracelet. But it wasn't just jewelry. You could see the way she glanced at the spot on her wrist where it used to be. You could see the way her breath caught each time she looked down, as if losing that little bracelet meant losing something much bigger. The crowd kept roaring, but Elvis's attention narrowed to a single point. A single person. A single problem. A strange tension spread through him, the kind he usually only felt before a big note or a risky move on stage. Something inside whispered, "This matters more than the song." He took a step back from the mic. No one noticed at first, the band covered it with the groove. But then he paused again, just long enough for a few people in the front rows to look up at him in confusion. The energy in the garden shifted, almost like the whole arena had taken one breath together. He glanced toward Charlie Hodge, standing just behind him with the water bottle and spare scarves. Charlie followed his gaze, saw the girl, saw the panic on her face, and his eyebrows lifted. He understood immediately. Elvis didn't even need to say a word. What would you have done if you were standing in front of nearly 20,000 people and saw one person quietly falling apart? Would you keep going? Or would you stop? Elvis took one final look at the bracelet on the ground. The crowd kept cheering, unaware of the moment that was about to unfold. He had a choice: stay in the spotlight, or step toward the shadows where one girl was hurting. The band played on, waiting for Elvis to come back in. Instead, he did something no one expected. He moved away from the microphone. Elvis had stepped away from the mic, but the band kept playing softly, unsure of what he was doing. The drums quieted. The guitars lowered. A strange hush rolled over the front rows, spreading outward like a ripple. People leaned in, trying to understand why the king had suddenly paused in the middle of a song. He looked down at the crying girl again. Her hands trembled as she wiped her face, trying not to draw attention. But her tears kept falling. The crowd around her tried to help, but everyone was packed in tight. Every time someone moved, the bodies pressed closer, making the moment worse. Her name, he would later learn, was Maria Hill, 16 years old, from New Jersey. She held her wrist like it was newly wounded. The silver outline where the bracelet used to be looked strangely empty, like a ghost of something she wasn't ready to let go of. One older woman beside her leaned over and shouted, "She lost something important," but her words vanished into the noise behind her. Elvis tilted his head, trying to hear. The girl looked up at him through tears, lips shaking. She mouthed the words, "My bracelet. It broke. It was my mom's." The bass player missed a note. Even he felt the pull of the moment. It was a tiny problem in the scale of a sold-out show. Yet somehow it didn't feel tiny at all. Not to her. Not to Elvis. Maybe not to anyone who had ever held on to something precious. Something that carried a memory stronger than the metal it was made from. Security guards noticed the tension and hurried forward. One of them tried to wave Elvis back to the mic. "Sir, we need to continue. The crowd's getting restless." But Elvis didn't move. He stared at the small silver shape on the ground. The cup beside it trembled from the rumble of the crowd. For a second, it felt like time slowed. Only the sound of breathing, whispering, shifting feet. A mid-hook moment struck. Most performers would have pretended they didn't see a thing. But Elvis wasn't like most performers. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, ignoring the guard's urgent warning. His cape brushed against the curtain behind him. Charlie Hodge shot him a worried look but didn't interfere. Charlie knew Elvis's instincts better than anyone. "Sir," another guard insisted, "we need to move on. There's too much pressure in the front." But Elvis's attention didn't waver. His eyes moved between Maria's face and the tiny glint on the floor. Maria tried to speak again, her voice cracking. "It was my mom's last gift to me." The words hit him harder than she meant them to. Elvis had lost his own mother years ago. He knew what it meant to cling to something that held their memory. A ring, a photograph, a moment, a feeling. You never really got those back. He took another step forward. The musicians exchanged confused glances. Some fans began to whisper. Others lifted their cameras, sensing something rare was happening. Something unscripted. Something human. "What would you do?" Elvis wondered silently. "If a whole arena was cheering for you, but one person was quietly breaking?" The crowd behind Maria grew restless again, pushing for a better view. A small shove sent her stumbling forward. Elvis instinctively reached out, even though she was still several feet away. That tiny reach sent a message through the arena. A shift, a spark. He turned toward the band, raised a hand, and the music faded into near silence. Only faint notes floated in the air, like an echo waiting for direction. This wasn't a planned moment. This wasn't a choreographed stunt. This was a choice. Elvis stepped fully to the edge of the stage. The security chief whispered harshly, "Sir, please, this isn't safe." But the king didn't blink. Something under that cup caught the light. That silver flash, barely visible, anchored his gaze. He took a breath. Then he did something that made the entire arena gasp. He bent his knees, leaned forward, and prepared to climb down. The moment Elvis leaned forward, preparing to step off the stage, the entire front section of Madison Square Garden shifted. People gasped. Some reached out as if they could steady him from 20 feet away. A few fans screamed his name, thinking he was about to fall. Even the band froze, instruments hanging midair like unanswered questions. Security reacted instantly. 2 guards rushed toward him, hands out. "Sir, please, don't leave the platform," one of them said, trying to stay calm. "We've got crowd pressure building. We need to keep you safe." But Elvis didn't step back. He stayed right at the edge, eyes locked on the crying girl below. Maria Hill wiped her cheeks with shaking hands, trying to apologize even though none of this was her fault. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words evaporated into the noise. A nervous energy spread through the crowd. 20,000 hearts beating faster at the same time. You could feel the tension in the air, like a rope pulled too tight. Elvis looked at Charlie Hodge standing behind him. Charlie gave a tiny nod. He knew what Elvis was thinking without needing a conversation. That was the thing about Elvis's inner circle. They understood the small moments that mattered to him just as much as the big ones. But security didn't share that understanding. "Sir," the chief guard insisted, stepping closer. "A move like this could trigger a rush. You know how these crowds get. We can handle the situation. Let us do our job. Elvis kept staring at Maria. Her eyes were full of worry. Not for herself, but for him. She knew he could get hurt trying to help her. That made her cry harder. He crouched slightly, lowering himself closer to the edge. "What's your name, honey?" he asked softly. She managed to say, "Maria." The sound of her name, fragile and scared, drifted up like a small plea. Elvis nodded slowly. "Maria, it's all right." The whole arena fell quieter. Even the people in the upper levels sensed that something delicate was happening. Phones weren't everywhere back then, but cameras clicked from every corner. Fans held their breath, waiting to see what the king was about to do. One misplaced step could cause chaos. One wrong move could cause a surge. But one right move could heal someone. The glint of the bracelet under the crushed cup kept drawing his eye. It wasn't big. It wasn't flashy. But the way Maria looked at it, like it was the last piece of someone she loved, gave it a weight far heavier than metal. A mid-hook thought sliced through him. This isn't about an object. This is about someone who feels alone in a crowd of thousands. The stakes weren't just emotional. They were physical. The security team knew it. The band knew it. Even the fans closest to the stage knew it. Some people started chanting, "Elvis! Elvis!" urging him to continue the show. Others yelled, "Help her!" splitting the crowd into two currents of energy. The sound built like a storm gathering strength. Elvis lifted one hand to calm them. The arena softened again, the chants fading into murmurs. He looked down at Maria. "It was your mom's?" he asked. She nodded, tears spilling over again. "She gave it to me right before she passed. I never take it off." Elvis felt something tighten in his chest. A memory. A familiarache. The kind you don't talk about but never forget. Behind him, the security chief whispered to another guard. "If he goes down there, we can't control this section. It's dangerous." Elvis heard him. He just didn't agree. "What would you do?" he wondered silently. "If you saw someone losing the one thing that kept a memory alive?" The band waited for direction. The crowd waited for a sign. Elvis shifted his weight, steady and sure. He didn't back away from the edge. In fact, he leaned closer, close enough to see the reflection of the spotlight in the tears on Maria's eyelashes. That tiny silver glint under the cup flickered again. He saw it. He chose. Elvis took a breath, braced himself, and ignored every warning around him. He stepped off the stage. The moment Elvis stepped off the stage, the entire arena inhaled at once. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a scream. It was something deeper. A shocked, collective breath that made 20,000 people freeze in place. Security lunged forward. "Sir, stop!" one of them shouted, panic sharpening his voice. But Elvis had already dropped to the ground, landing with a soft thud on the padded floor in front of the stage. The cape on his shoulders fluttered like a broken wing before settling behind him. Fans closest to him reached out but didn't touch. They held themselves back out of respect, or maybe disbelief. Seeing Elvis Presley this close, kneeling among them, felt unreal, like the rules of the world had suddenly cracked open. Maria Hill stood only a few feet away, hands trembling. Her eyes widened as she realized he was coming toward her. "No, please, don't," she whispered, terrified he'd get hurt because of her. But Elvis shook his head gently. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured. His voice was soft, steady, warm, cut through the noise like a light in the dark. The crowd hushed, creating a strange bubble of silence in the middle of the roaring building. The bracelet glinted again under the cup. Elvis crouched, lowering himself to one knee. His boots pressed into the mat. The spotlight followed him, narrowing to a small bright circle around his body. Everything else faded into soft shadow. He reached toward the cup. A guard whispered sharply, "Sir, please, let us grab it." "You don't need to." Elvis didn't answer. He slid the cup aside with 2 fingers. There it was, a thin silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm, bent slightly from the weight of the crowd. He picked it up slowly, brushing off a speck of dust with his thumb. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if he were holding something far more fragile than a piece of jewelry. As if he saw not a bracelet but a story, a memory, a mother's love passed down to her child. Short burst lines hit the air. He paused. He breathed. He understood. Maria covered her mouth, tears spilling faster. "It's all I have of her," she cried softly. Elvis stood, still holding the bracelet. "Then we're not leaving it down here, are we?" he said gently. The crowd sighed, part relief, part amazement, part something they couldn't quite name. He stepped closer to Maria. Every camera in the building fired at once. Light flashed like lightning. The band watched silently from the stage, stunned. Even the security guards seemed mesmerized, as if they too felt the weight of what was happening. Elvis lifted Maria's wrist and, with the care of someone handling something sacred, reattached the bracelet's tiny hook. The charm rested against her skin, warm from his hand. Her breath broke into a sob. "Thank you," she whispered. Elvis smiled softly, the kind of smile people remembered for years. "Hold on to this," he said. "Hold on tight." It was only a sentence, but in that moment it sounded like a blessing. The hush snapped. An explosion of cheers tore through the arena, louder than anything that had come before. The floor shook. People in the upper levels jumped to their feet. The ovation rolled over him like thunder. Security looked relieved, but also shaken. Nothing in their training covered a moment like this. Elvis turned back toward the stage, wiping a faint sheen of sweat from his brow. His cape lifted behind him as the spotlight followed his climb back up the steps. The band stood ready. The crowd waited, breathless. Maria clutched her wrist, shaking. Elvis reached the mic, looked out at the massive sea of faces, and gave a tiny nod to the drummer. But the next thing he did, no one could have predicted. The arena was still shaking from the roar of applause when Elvis reached the microphone again. His chest rose and fell with a deep breath, the kind you take when your heart is still catching up to what your body just did. Sweat glimmered along his hairline. The lights hit him from above, turning his white jumpsuit into a glowing silhouette. The band waited for his cue. The choir looked at him, unsure. Set lists meant nothing now. Something larger was unfolding, and every musician on stage felt it. Elvis looked down at Maria Hill once more. She held her wrist tight against her chest, the bracelet safe again. Her tears had changed. Less fear, more relief, maybe even joy. People around her offered tissues, hugs, small words of comfort. The crowd had become a family in an instant. Elvis leaned into the mic. "Let's slow it down a little," he said, voice warm and steady. Charlie Hodge nodded and handed him a fresh scarf. The stage lights dimmed, dipping the room into a softer blue glow. The audience quieted quickly, sensing they were about to witness something rare. Elvis raised his hand gently. The guitarist switched to a delicate intro, soft, shimmering, almost like a lullaby, and the first notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" floated through the building. The garden fell silent. Even the upper decks leaned forward, waiting. But Elvis didn't face the whole room. He faced her, Maria. He sang the opening line not to 20,000 people, but to one girl who thought she had ruined her night. His voice softened to match the tenderness of the moment. It wasn't the Elvis who commanded stages. It was the Elvis who understood pain, who understood memory, who understood what it felt like to lose someone you loved. Every camera snapped again. Little flashes danced across the arena like fireflies. A faint crackle of tape hiss came from somewhere nearby, someone recording the moment on a small bootleg recorder held above the crowd. For a brief moment, the entire arena wasn't an arena anymore. It was a quiet room, a gentle space, a shared heartbeat. You could almost feel the stillness settle over everyone, like peace sliding in through the cracks. Maria covered her mouth, sobbing softly but smiling at the same time. Elvis nodded toward her between lines, grounding her, reminding her she mattered, that she wasn't alone, that her moment of loss had been transformed into something beautiful. Would you have believed a superstar could stop a show just to heal one person? Would you have believed a single act of kindness could ripple across a whole arena? As the chorus swelled, fans began lighting small lighters and raising them high. The glow swept across the audience like a field of stars rising from the darkness. The sight was so breathtaking that even Elvis paused mid-breath to take it in. When he reached the final line, his voice cracked, not from strain, but from pure emotion. He held the last note with a fragile strength, then let it fade into the quiet. Silence sat heavy for one impossible second. Then the garden erupted. The ovation wasn't just loud, it was overwhelming. People stomped. People screamed. People cried. Elvis bowed his head, humbled by the wave of love crashing over him. Maria clutched her bracelet, holding it so tightly her knuckles went white. She looked at Elvis like she'd never forget this moment for the rest of her life. Elvis looked back at her, and one simple thought hit him. I wasn't meant to just return a bracelet. I was meant to return hope. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet, because someone in the crowd had captured everything. When the show ended that night, people didn't rush for the exits the way they usually did. They moved slowly, talking in excited bursts, replaying the moment over and over like they needed to make sure it really happened. It wasn't just a concert anymore. It felt like they had watched a piece of history form right in front of them. A teenager near the left aisle clutched a small tape recorder in both hands. The red light on it still glowed. He had recorded everything, the silence, the gasps, the bracelet, the song. The audio was shaky and full of crowd noise, but the heart of the moment was there, alive and raw. He slipped it into his jacket, knowing somehow it mattered. A few days later, that bootleg tape started passing from fan to fan. It traveled through hands like a secret message. People labeled it in pencil, Bracelet Night, Garden June 10th, 72. Soon it became one of those underground treasures fans whispered about at record shops. Magazines caught wind of it too. A small teen publication printed a short clipping, Elvis Stops Show to Help Fan. They didn't have the full story, just secondhand details. But the headline alone was enough to spark curiosity everywhere it appeared. Meanwhile, Maria Hill kept the bracelet safe for years. She wore it only on special days, afraid of losing it again. Every time she touched it, she remembered the warmth of Elvis's hand closing the clasp, the kindness in his voice, the way the entire arena seemed to breathe with her. Decades later, when she was older, she donated the bracelet to a small museum in Memphis. It was displayed inside a glass case beside a fading concert ticket and a printed photo of Elvis kneeling on the arena floor. Visitors stopped and read the plaque beneath it. Returned by Elvis Presley himself, June 10, 1972. The room always fell quiet there. People stood a little longer. Some wiped their eyes. Even children seemed to understand the weight of it. Because it wasn't about a bracelet. It was about a moment when a superstar chose compassion over spectacle. A local fan club began telling the bracelet story each June. They gathered in a rented hall, played the grainy bootleg tape, and read a short diary page Maria had written about that night. She described the fear she felt when the bracelet broke, and the peace she felt when Elvis placed it back on her wrist. Kindness, she wrote, can echo longer than applause. And it did. That one small act traveled across decades, carried by fans who never forgot the sound of 20,000 people watching a legend kneel to help a single girl. But the story had one more truth to reveal. A truth that tied everything back to the heart of the moment. Years after that night, people still talked about the bracelet as if it were a myth whispered through concerts and record shops. But for Elvis, it wasn't a myth. It was a reminder of something he believed deep inside. That music was meant to heal, not just entertain. The story returned to him more than once. Someone would mention that girl in the garden, and he'd quietly nod, eyes soft, remembering the moment the entire arena fell silent. He never bragged about it, never told the story himself. He simply carried it the way people carry small, bright memories that help them stay human. Some said the moment went viral before the word viral even existed. Others said it spread because people were hungry for kindness in a loud, busy world. But the truth was simpler. The act touched people because it was honest. Elvis had seen a girl breaking in front of him, And he chose to stop. He didn't think about cameras. He didn't think about headlines. He didn't think about being the king of rock and roll. He thought about a daughter missing her mother, about grief hiding behind a trembling smile, about the kind of pain you don't talk about unless someone truly sees you. And maybe that's what made the moment unforgettable. In a place built for noise and spotlight and fame, Elvis created a small, quiet pocket of compassion. He turned a chaotic scene into something gentle, something human. Visitors at the museum often ask the same question while staring at the bracelet in its glass case. Why did he stop? Why did he care so much? Maybe the answer lived in Elvis's own past. Maybe he remembered his mother's touch. Maybe he saw a reflection of his younger self in Maria's tears. Or maybe he simply believed that no one, no matter who they are, should feel alone in a crowd. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Would you have paused? Would you have noticed? Would you have cared? Before leaving the museum one day, Maria wrote a final message on the guest book. He didn't just return my bracelet. He returned my hope. And that line became the true legacy. Not the cheers, not the headlines, not the bootleg tape, but the reminder that even a small act of kindness can echo far beyond the moment. If the story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness still matters. Tell us, have you ever had a stranger step in at the exact moment you needed help? Your story could inspire the next person who feels alone in a crowded world.